We are live.
Namaste. Welcome to the second of our learning series, India as a Republic Nation. We're really looking forward to the second in the series. I know the first one was truly enjoyed by all the viewers. And so this is the second of it, and you're going to get a lot of information today from our wonderful teachers, who I'm going to talk about first before I tell you what's going to be covered today. So we have, for the benefit of all those who weren't here yesterday and are joining us today, I'm going to start with our esteemed Sanjay Rao, who is the Vice Principal for Culture at Shishu Bharati, Nashua. And he also teaches culture to the 8th grade students. And he has been working with the Shishu Bharati, Nashua for the past 14 years. So he's one of our seniors here who's helping us learn more about the Indian Constitution and its history. Then we have a pretty lady here, Swati Lekha Mehti, has been teaching Indian history and geography to middle school children at Shishu Bharati, Lexington for the last 6 years. She's an analytics professional and loves to read and travel while trying out different cuisines. So I hope to get to eat some of her different cuisines someday. And then we have, last but not the least, we have our wonderful Rupesh Mathur, who has been teaching culture and at Shishu Bharati, Nashua for the past 5 years. He's a mechanical engineer and is passionate about learning and teaching history, culture, and philosophy. So as you can see, we have a wonderful set of teachers who are very eager to teach you all about India and its history. All of us who've been to school many, many years ago have either not learned or remembered, do not remember any of it. So this has been such a wonderful training session for all of us. So today's subjects that they're going to cover is some of the, I know they're going to go into the detail of it all, but I'm going to tell you a little bit of what you can expect to hear today. One is the role of women in the formation of the Indian Constitution. As you know, most countries that are democratic countries did not have as many women involved in the formation of their constitution as India did. Even though they were a minority amongst all the men, there was still a large number of women who were very significant. So our teachers are going to be talking about some of those significant women. There is also going to be detail about what the Constitution and our Indian Constitution and how it compares with the other constitutions in the rest of the world, and how we were able to pick bits and pieces from the rest of the world to create our own constitution. And we're also going to have some video about how Republic Day is celebrated. So stay tuned, pick up your cup of tea or cocoa or chai, like I said yesterday, and go ahead and relax and enjoy this wonderful teaching session by these great teachers. Okay, so thank you, and over to you, Rupesh, who's going to start off tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Lataji. We have a very nice set. Thank you for the kind introduction. We're going to start presenting now. Just give a second for Swati to get started. So today we're going to talk about about becoming a republic, which is independence, post-independence India, the challenges that India faced after independence, and all the discussions that happened, and all the people who were involved. And then, as Lataji said, we are going to have a comparison of the constitutions of India with other countries. So let's get started. So where we left off is that the Indian Constitution sets the governing principles and laws for the Indian Republic. And it came into force on Republic Day, 26 January 1950, which is why we celebrate Republic Day. And it's a product of the Constituent Assembly, which was a body of representative lawmakers who were brought together to create the Constitution and to create the structure of the modern Indian state. And the father of the Indian Constitution, whose first 2 pages, this beautiful art full page that you see here, is Dr. Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar, who's the father of the Indian Constitution, along with many other people. So you'll hear some about them. So in the period after independence, India had a very tempestuous history right up till Republic Day. So from about 1946, about a year before independence, up until Republic Day 1950, it was pretty tempestuous. And even after that it was, but then things started taking shape. So there are a couple of cartoons here which are very nice. The India had been divided because of the partition, and so the unity of India had been shattered. And the leaders who came after that, such as Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, who was the prime minister, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, and others, who was the home minister, they had a massive job on their hands, which was to put together or stitch together a full country out of all the pieces that they got. And especially princely states, which were these kingdoms ruled by Nawabs, Rajas, Maharajas, they all needed to be integrated. And then they also had to deal with a war. So the right after partition, pretty much, there was the first India-Pakistan war over Kashmir. So the two countries went to war almost immediately over Kashmir. Then there was a very tragic event, which was the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi. And at the same time, all these people, they had been in jail until quite recently because of the Quit India movement. And they were not really ready for the challenges and the burdens of governance. And they had to deal with a chaotic country which had lots of issues. So socioeconomic issues, political issues, all kinds of issues that you can think of. The right cartoon actually is a very nice cartoon about independence, right? And all kinds of people had all kinds of reactions to being finally free from British rule, and some of them kind of lost their head. So you can see, Independence Bar and all kinds of things are happening there. So this is kind of a representation of everything that went on. So let's take a look at those challenges. Next slide. So integration of the princely states. As you can see from the map on the right, that the orange areas were the original areas ruled by the British, which modern India, independent India inherited. And then those areas in blue were usually small kingdoms and principalities. And a country which was ruled by all these people would not be a viable country, right? So, so the challenge was to get them to agree to accede to either India or Pakistan. The British, before they left, because they liked the princely states, said, join India, join Pakistan, or be independent, be your own country. But the leaders who came after them, especially Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, said, we cannot have that. We cannot have two different sets of people, two different administrative areas, the way that British governed. That is not acceptable. And so Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel went on a major project, which was to create or weld together a modern Indian nation. And that, for that reason, he's called the Iron Man of India. And he managed to, by using bribery, by intimidation, strong arming, whatever tactics worked, sweet talking also, he managed to get most of the princely states to accede to India. So they gave them money, which is called the privy purses, to represent the income that that the rulers would lose. And basically, by one way or the other, he managed to create a country. And so most states acceded to the integration. The two exceptions were Kashmir and Hyderabad. Kashmir, which was in the far north, had a Hindu king. You see his picture on the left here. He was Raja Hari Singh, who was the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir. And then there was Hyderabad, which was an independent country, which was actually quite substantial, which was ruled by His Excellency Mir Usman Ali Khan, Nizam of Hyderabad. And here the king was Muslim, but the rulers were Hindus. The subjects were Hindu. So Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel had to do something pretty drastic about that. And so with Kashmir, I'll talk about India-Pakistan war, which was on Kashmir. Hyderabad, actually, the same thing happened. The Nizam of Hyderabad held out, and ultimately there was what's called the police action, which is a polite way of saying that the Indian army invaded from the south and they invaded from the west. And the Nizam of Hyderabad didn't stand a chance after that. So the Indian army had just come back from fighting World War II, so they were really, really up to the job. So Hyderabad acceded, and then for Kashmir, we'll talk about that in a little bit. So next slide. So what happened is that with Kashmir, the Maharaja did not want to accede. He liked being an independent country, and he did not want to. He was thinking about independence. And then what happened is that the Pakistanis, who really wanted, so the K in Pakistan stands for Kashmir. So they got together a tribal militia, thousands and tens of thousands of tribals, armed to the teeth, and the new Pakistan army, which was a part of the former Indian Army. They invaded India in 1947, 1948. And so when they invaded and started coming towards Srinagar, where the king was, he asked for help. At which point, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel said, "We will help you if you accede to India." Right. So at that point, Raja Hari Singh signed the accession document, and then Indian Army went into Kashmir and to defend Kashmir against the invaders. So a new state of Jammu and Kashmir was created with Sheikh Abdullah as chief minister. The Raja was, like with all the other princely states, stepped aside. They were going to have a plebiscite or referendum to get the approval of the population. And they promulgated the famous Article 370 to protect the rights of Kashmiris. So that was the basic structure. Can you go back for a second? So I want to talk about on the right side what happened. At the bottom right, you see the person whose picture's name is Major Somnath Sharma, who is considered the first military martyr of modern India. And so he was airlifted to Srinagar along with his company of the Indian Army. And not far from the airport, at a place called Budgam, he faced the invaders directly, and him about 200 people versus probably about 700 to 1,000 people, and he made a heroic last stand. And unfortunately, he died in the fighting, and he was awarded the first Paramveer Chakra. Interestingly, his own sister-in-law had designed the medal, so and he was the first recipient of the medal. So November 3, 1947, he became a martyr. Next slide. So that was pretty tumultuous. And then in January 1948, the big event was the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi, who was assassinated by Nathuram Godse, whose picture you see in the center, on January 30th at Birla House, now Gandhi Smriti. On the left, you can see the steps of Gandhi. He went up those steps, and then at this pavilion where in the picture, he was shot by Nathuram Godse. And the motivation that Godse gave, that Gandhiji was favoring Pakistan and the Muslims, especially in the matter of the transfer of assets to Pakistan government. So the assets which were inherited from the British had to be divided, and that included a substantial amount of money. And Gandhiji wanted the fair share to be transferred to Pakistan because of that. And at the bottom is the speech that the Prime Minister Nehru made after the assassination, which is called "The Light Has Gone Out of Our Lives" speech, and there's very poignant and moving quote from the speech. Next slide. So then we go through some of the critical constitutional debates. So they had to figure a lot of things out from scratch. They had some precedent from the Government of India Act 1935, which we talked about yesterday, but they had to basically start from scratch and make some decisions there. So we'll take a look at some of the decisions, some of which were made and some of which were not made and kicked down the road, right? So the first decision to be made was to look at the governance model to follow for the Republic of India. They examined closely the American presidential system, the British parliamentary system, and the Swiss Federation, and then voted on which one they wanted. So American presidential system, which we are very familiar with, there's a powerful executive, there's a clear separation of powers, you have the president, you have the Supreme Court, you have Congress and Senate, right? We all know it, it's in the news. The British parliamentary system essentially has a titular head, which in the UK is the Queen or King, right? And so the monarchy is a titular head. And then the party with the largest majority in parliament elects a leader who's called the Prime Minister, who has his cabinet from among the people who were elected, and they rule the country. So there's a lot of flexibility because if the Prime Minister you don't like the Prime Minister, elect somebody else. The majority party can elect somebody else, and who becomes the Prime Minister. So you can have as many Prime Ministers as you want. So it's very flexible. There's a harmony between the executive and legislative branches. The Queen is the titular head. Unfortunately, it also means that there's a rule by amateurs. So people who are not qualified can suddenly become ministers and prime ministers, which means they have to rely on a powerful bureaucracy. So the bureaucracy in the United Kingdom is very powerful, as it is in India, actually, eventually. And then finally, you have the Swiss Federation, which is very flat, very egalitarian. You have all these independent cantons, and they send people up to govern as an equal. So it's in a power sharing arrangement, and that's a very weak center, right? And so they discussed all three systems, and then they voted for the British parliamentary system, mainly because they were very familiar with it. Many of them had studied in the United Kingdom, the systems that the British had put in borrowed a lot from the British parliamentary system. So they said, okay, we know what this is, so let's vote for it. So India voted for the British parliamentary system. In the end, they went with what they knew, actually. Next slide. And then there were other debates. So, what is the role of the president of India? Is he a weak rubber stamp, where the prime minister is all powerful, as in the United Kingdom, or is he a high-powered executive, as with the U.S. president? So they said, okay, let's call him Rashtrapati, and he's the commander in chief of the armed forces. He's the constitutional head, and he has actually some powers. So he can dissolve government, he can form new governments, he can call parties to form new governments. So he has some powers. And then they talked about the names and roles for the bicameral legislatures. And they came up with the lower house's name, which is Lok Sabha, which many of us know. And the Lok Sabha is directly elected by the people. And then there's the upper house, which is Rajya Sabha, which is indirect. And they all had specific roles. And the third question was, how strong should the center be, and how much power do states and local bodies have? So the Gandhians, because Gandhi said that India lives in its villages, they wanted village republics and state republics and district republics, which then roll up to a national republic. Whereas people like Ambedkar and Nehru rejected that, and they said, we want a strong center that can rule the country with an iron hand if need be. And then they looked at the precedent set by the Government of India Act 1935, and they said, okay, so let's have certain subjects be state subjects. So education, for instance, is a state subject. Certain subjects be central subjects. So things like defense of India is a central subject. And the certain other subjects are concurrent subjects. So things like finance. So every state has a budget, and the country has a budget, right? So that's the kind of thing there. So they made certain decisions there along the way. Next slide. And then they had to look at the nature of India. And in India, caste plays a huge role. It played an even greater role back then. And people like Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, who grew up as a Dalit or untouchable, were very keen to have special treatment for scheduled castes and Dalits. And there were two people there who were from the Dalit or untouchable caste. So that is Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar and Srimati Dakshayani Velayudan, whom you'll hear about it for a little bit. And they had a pretty spirited debate. And Ambedkar was very keen on education for the scheduled caste and Dalits and to ensure jobs. And so to enable equity, to make sure that people who had been oppressed for a long, long time get a chance to thrive and survive, they had the concept of reservations. So the concept of reservations was part of the constitutional debates and was an outcome of the constitutional debates. And Srimati Velayudan basically said, I don't want to have reservations, whereas Ambedkar said we need to have reservations. We need to eliminate caste first by raising up the people who were at the bottom of the society and raising them, giving them education, giving them jobs so that they can prosper and they become equal to the rest of the society. And he was very critical of India as a country for that reason. And then they had to think about the rights of minorities. So remember that they had just come out of partition, and the partition was enabled by the British through separate electorates, which gave huge amount of power to Muslims who were only 24% of the population. And so Nehru and others in the Nehru report had said, we will not have separate electorates. We will have limited special treatment of minorities. And so certain groups of people, such as the Anglo-Indians, get special representation. So to the right is Mr. Frank Anthony, who was a prominent Anglo-Indian, and he's a member of the Constituent Assembly who participated in the debates and then ensured that Anglo-Indians got 2 seats. I think recently they've been abolished. And Mr. Frank Anthony is very famous because he's the founder of ICSE. So those of you who went through the ICSE system, you have him to thank or blame. And he's also founded a set of schools which are named after him called the Frank Anthony Public Schools. These are all excellent schools. There's one in Bangalore, which many of you might have heard of. Next slide. So the other thing that they had to think about was equality under law. So India in 1947 and even earlier was extremely unequal because you had all these former Maharajas, Nawabs, Rajas of various tribes who considered themselves above everybody else. And then at the bottom, you had the untouchables. So Ambedkar especially was very keen on rights, and they looked at the Bill of Rights from the United States, and they came up with a set of fundamental rights, and you can see them listed on the bottom left. So their right to equality, right to freedom, right against exploitation, right to freedom of religion, cultural and educational rights, and right to constitutional remedies. And so the fundamental rights are enshrined in the Indian Constitution for all Indians. And then they had to look at the role of Indian languages versus English in governance. And here's where they had a division, because Hindi came out as a strong candidate to be the national language, but there was strong opposition from South India. I mean, it continues to this day. In Tamil Nadu, you have strong opposition and there was in fact an anti-Hindi agitation at some point. And then they didn't want to get rid of English. It's a foreign language, so it can't be a national language, but it's very important because a lot of people know and understand English. And so English became an important link language. And so finally, the compromise was that Hindi became the national language, so it's Rashtra Bhasha, and then English is the link language, and then there are multiple official languages, right? So you can see that India has like a ton of languages. So there are 16 official languages, and then there are 250 other dialects or languages that are recognized in the Indian Constitution. Next slide. Then there were two debates that did not reach a conclusion. The first was Uniform Civil Code, which is uniform application of law to personal affairs. So this includes marriage, divorce, inheritance, adoption, and maintenance. And before then, the British allowed personal law. So they said, okay, the Muslims had their own personal law, the Hindus had their own personal law, Parsis had their own personal law. Anybody who wanted had a personal law based on religion and caste. And the Uniform Civil Code wanted to get rid of all that and have one single set of personal laws. And there was a strong opposition by the Muslim members, and their main argument was based on violating freedom of religion, which is one of the fundamental rights. And there are a few other arguments they made. And because India had just gone through partition and they did not want to alienate the Muslim members of society, so they gave in and they did not actually pass a uniform civil code. So the debate was inconclusive, and it's still a goal for India. It's in the directive principles, which are recommendations, and Article 44 of the Indian Constitution, which is part of the directive principles, does mandate that at some point India will have a uniform civil code. And there's a cartoon of the Prime Minister Modi asking what's next on the bucket list, and with a real bucket there, which is uniform civil code. And there are, in fact, Facebook groups that say that they demand a uniform civil code. Next slide. As part of this, there was a huge debate on the Hindu Code Bill, which replaces the personal law for Hindus and other communities. So because they couldn't agree on a uniform civil code, they said, okay, let's look at Hindu Code Bill, because Hindus are the majority in India. And also other minor communities which had their own personal laws, which are kind of very similar. They said, let's draft a bill that replaces all the existing personal laws for Hindus and other communities. So Sikhs and Parsis and so on. So Dr. B.R. Ambedkar actually was very keen, because he, being an untouchable, wanted to abolish caste. So he thought that by having a uniform code for all Hindus, that would accomplish the goal. And Pandit Nehru, who was the prime minister, was very keen on it, because he was keen on modernization. He wanted to modernize India, he wanted to unite India, and he was especially keen on rights of women. And this was bitterly opposed by many members of the society and by the Constituent Assembly. They could not find a compromise. And as a result, Ambedkar resigned from his post as law minister eventually, and he left government actually. And so what happened is, so you can see some of the cartoons from that time, and there was a fiery debate. So especially the opposition was on rights of women. And they kind of said that women will be able to easily leave their husbands, right? And so the other name was divorce made easy. So you'll find lots of cartoons, and you can see, and everybody's running away. And all the women are behind Ambedkar. And they used that as a fear. And then you can see another cartoon of Pandit Nehru trying to convince people who oppose the Hindu Code Bill to give it up. right? So they're lying on a bed of nails. So, and then to the right is kind of reminder of Buddhism, right? So Gautama Buddha, who was Siddhartha, Prince Siddhartha, left his wife and child to go out into the world. And renunciation, that was one of the things that happened. So they generated quite a bit of debate. And finally, the Hindu Code Bill was broken up into four parts and passed by Pandit Nehru and the Indian National Congress when they were in the majority in Parliament. So you can see that there. Next slide. So then that brings us to Nehru's vision for India, because Nehru was the Prime Minister of India. He was extremely popular outside India and inside India. And he had a grand vision of India. And his vision revolved around modernization and socialism. So he was very influenced by Fabian socialism, which was a version of socialism that the United Kingdom had adopted. And he was very keen to see India develop as a modern country. And he was highly influenced by the USSR, especially their 5-year plans. So USSR development was carried out through 5-year plans. So what he did is he created a planning commission, which would set policies for economic growth and create 5-year plans. That was headed by Praful Chandra Mahalanobis, who was a great statistician and planner. And then he had 6 goals for India, so which were national unity, parliamentary democracy, industrialization, socialism, technical education, and non-alignment. And to the bottom right, you see the planning meetings for the creation of IIT Madras. So these were provided to me by the alumni office at IIT Madras because I graduated from there. And these are the planning meetings with the German government. So you can see Dr. C. Rajagopalachari, who took a major role in planning IIT Madras. So that's Nehru's vision. So now, so you can see now that that's the direction that India was taking, that was set by the Constituent Assembly and by all the people who were involved there. Next, we'll look at some of the people who actually played a huge role in the forming of the Indian Constitution and shaping the future Indian Republic. So I'll pass it on to Sanjay and Swati now.
Thank you, Rupesh. That was excellent. So as you must have seen in session 1, we talked about the Constituent Assembly, which actually came together, which was solely created for the purpose of drafting the Constitution. And they came up with the Indian Constitution as we know of it today. And Rupesh explained there were so many challenges along the way, right? Those 299 members were representatives of various language groups, various religions, different parts of India. So they all came together, and each one of them deserved recognition for the huge role they played in drafting the Constitution. We will only talk about 4 of them, and that too just because of a big role they played while drafting the Constitution, and immediately afterwards in the implementation. Because, and plus, this is not their life history. Just to be fair, I wanted to kind of call this out before we go into these slides, because each one of them deserve an hour session at the very least. So these are all amazing personalities. So we'll start with Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, who you see there on the right side of the screen. He was born into a very low caste family, and he experienced discrimination in his childhood as he belonged to the low caste. And in fact, there were days when at school, he would not get a glass of water because being a person of low caste, he was not allowed to go get the water himself. So if the peon who was responsible for handing out the water was missing or absent for that day, they would go without water for the entire day. So those are like some of the challenges that he faced, but he was an exceptional student. So he ended up getting a degree in economics and political science from Bombay University, as it was known then. It is known as Mumbai now. And then he got a master's from Columbia University and a doctorate of science from the University of London. So as you can see, being a really bright student, he put that to use and accumulated a wealth of knowledge. And then when he came back to India, obviously, he was part of the Constituent Assembly, as we learned yesterday. And he became the chairman of the committee that drafted the Indian Constitution. And because he was from the low caste and he saw all the different challenges they faced, for him, these were some of the constitutional guarantees that he was not willing to compromise on. And as you also learned from Rupesh's slide, that when he was the first law minister of independent India, he actually resigned and walked away because some of those things they could not arrive at a compromise. But these were some of the things that he wanted: civil liberties for individuals, freedom of religion, obviously. This was the very important one: the abolition of untouchability and outlawing of all forms of discrimination, social and economic rights for women, and reservations of jobs. So again, like Rupesh explained, Dr. Ambedkar was in favor of reserving certain jobs, especially in civil services, schools and colleges, to give opportunity to the people from the lower caste who back in those days were severely ostracized and literally resided in the fringes of society. And he also opposed Article 370 of the Constitution of India, which was finally revoked very recently. As Rupesh also mentioned, that he had a vision of united one India, and he felt that the center should be able to dispense law uniformly across the country, and so having a special rights for Kashmiris was something that he did not agree with at that time. So next slide, please. The other personality we'll talk about is Justice Benegal Narsingh Rao. So many of you must have not even heard this name. And in fact, as we were studying, researching to put together this content for you all, we realized that he's one of the personalities who played a huge role in drafting the Constitution, but was never recognized. He came from the Indian Civil Service, and he was a man of principles. So when he was posted to Madras, he actually refused that posting because his family was in Madras, and he felt that this was the Madras province and not the state, because this was in the British times. And he felt that because his family was there, he might not be able to, because there was a conflict of interest, and he did not want to serve in that province. And he ended up being posted to Bengal. So he worked with the Reforms Office, and the Government of India Act of 1935 was, he played a big role in drafting that. And after that, he actually revised the entire statutory code, for which he was knighted. So that's why he was actually Sir B.N. Rao. And he was appointed at that point when they brought together the Constituent Assembly. They felt that his knowledge would play a huge part. So he was actually appointed as the constitutional advisor. And in that capacity, he traveled to various countries. We saw yesterday how India borrowed several things from different constitutions, which they felt would be a good fit for a country like India. And so he was actually responsible for traveling to several countries, as you can see there, where he met with judges, scholars, authorities who understood constitutional law and brought back ideas from them. And it was, incorporated into the Indian Constitution. Some feel that, he was not recognized mainly because, one, he was a bureaucrat and not a leader. And, although he played a big part, it was mainly away from the public eye. And the other thing was, all these leaders who, he was knighted too, and, by the British government. And so they felt that all the leaders should represent that, the spirit of nationalism. And so although many of the other leaders also studied abroad, but because they were actively out there among the people fighting for independence, his name kind of got relegated to the, to the back pages of, so to speak, of the history books. And although he was so brilliant, so you can see actually he also assisted in drafting the constitution for Burma, Myanmar, and Burma as it was known then. And he was a judge at the International Court of Justice from 1952 till his death. In fact, he was actually a leading contender for, the top post at the United Nations as well. So next slide. This picture must be familiar to people from, who studied in India. He was actually the first president of India. Dr. Rajendra Prasad, I should call out the name. He was actually a brilliant scholar, teacher, and he took on the responsibility to take the top post, as he was also the president of the Constituent Assembly, and he kind of guided them through the process. And at the end of the day, he accepted the Constitution from Dr. Ambedkar, and he signed it into effect. And he played a prominent role. As you can see here, he was a very learned person, and he actually he had several publications, Searchlight in English and the Hindi weekly called Desh. And he went to jail several times uh, during the fight for independence. So they felt that as a commander in chief, he embodied all the values that was required by a person to be the first leader of India. And so they chose him to be the president. And after being president for 2 terms, he finally stepped away in 1962. Next slide. And when we talk about India as a whole, as Rupesh explained, India was, first of all, with the British, they created all these different electorates, and they created a massive situation where there was a lot of contention, a lot of argument among different groups. And so it was a huge challenge to bring it all together and make it into a single country, right? I mean, so today, as we know it, I mean, if you look at India's history, there were so many different empires, so many different kingdoms. And today we know it as a single nation, although there are so many different languages and so much diversity, which we've learned to, we actually pride ourselves on it. And one of the key persons who actually implemented, not only played a huge part in drafting the constitution and arguing about the various benefits of the different provisions therein, he also played a huge part in bringing India together, as Rupesh shared in the slides early on. So he was actually from Gujarat, as you can see here, and he came under the influence of Gandhiji, and important. He organized several satyagrahas in that region, and that is why he actually got the title of Sardar. And he served in the Ahmedabad municipality, as you can see there, from 1917 to 1928. And I think, being a barrister and a statesman, he learned, how you manage, the expectations of people, how you deliver on, social, understand the social structure, So, so one of the things that Rupesh mentioned was Pandit Nehru's vision for the country was of socialism. And this is where I think he disagreed with Pandit Nehru. He felt that socialist ideas were not the best fit for the Indian environment, and he believed in free enterprise. And one more thing about Sardar Patel, as Rupesh said, he was the Iron Man of India. He was very decisive, and this played a huge role in him bringing the country together. So he was, and when India gained independence, as we all know, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was the first prime minister. But along with him, Sardar Patel, who was the deputy prime minister, played he was actually one of the co-leaders of the country. And whenever Pandit Nehru was traveling abroad and things like that, Sardar Patel had a big role to play in, and I think at that time, the integration of Hyderabad also happened when Pandit Nehru was not in the country. So he was a prominent leader. So we thought we should also discuss a little bit about him. And one of the things you see there on the right-hand side is the Statue of Freedom. It's a massive statue of Sardar Patel, which you can visit if you go to Gujarat. And last thing I would just want to mention is he was instrumental in creation of the All India Services, which kind of is an umbrella organization for the civil services. So that said, I'm going to hand it over to Swati, who's going to continue us through this journey.
Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you, Rupesh. So in the next section, we are going to actually talk about the 15 women whom I know yesterday in the session, Sanjay and Rupesh spoke about that there were 15 women who were very much involved in drafting of the Indian Constitution. So here we are going to talk about each of them. Obviously, given the time, we will not have time to get into details about everyone, but we'll talk about highlights of some of the key things that each of them contributed to. And maybe for a couple of them, we'll go into a little bit of details. So starting from the top left corner, we have Ammu Swaminathan. So Ammu Swaminathan was a social worker and a political activist, and she is known to have a very candid and straight mind. So she would just talk out whatever the way she felt. And another couple of interesting facts about her is that her daughters are and her family, they're also pretty well known, and we all know them in our regular lives. So her oldest daughter, Captain Lakshmi Swaminathan, was an officer of Indian National Army and the wife of Prem Segal, who was also distinguished officer of Azad Hind Fauj. And they are parents of Anisa Puri and Suhasini Ali. And Suhasini Ali, we all know, she's a feminist and a member of the Communist Party of India. Her other daughter, Mrilanini Sarabhai, she's a Bharatanatyam dancer and also the wife of Vikram Sarabhai. And their daughter, Mallika Sarabhai, is also somebody whom we know, being the renowned dancer she is. Moving on to the next personality, she's Dakshayani Velayudan, whom Rupesh already spoke about in talking about framing of the Indian Constitution and about the role she played in her debates with Baba Sahib Ambedkar for bringing about the rights of the minorities. So she was a representative of the scheduled caste in the Constituent Assembly, and she's in fact known to be the first scheduled caste woman to have graduated in India. Next comes Begum Aizaz Rasul. So she was again the only Muslim woman in the Constituent Assembly, and she came from the UP Legislative Assembly. The next personality that we see is Durgabai Deshmukh. So she was also a freedom fighter, a social worker, and a politician. And after serving in the Constituent Assembly, she became a member of the Planning Commission of India. So that's a significant role she played. The next personality we see is Hansha Jivraj Mehta. She was also, she is a person with multi-talent and immense personality. So she was a reformist, a social activist, and educator, feminist, and a writer. She was a very noted academician who served on high-profile positions before and after independence. And she's also known for the books that she has written for children and also translated. Then the next personality we see here is Kamla Chaudhary. She was also a writer and freedom fighter, and eventually a member of Lok Sabha. Then we see Leela Roy. So Leela Roy was a reformer, progressive leftist, and a feminist who of course was an Indian politician. She was very close associate of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. And incidentally, when Netaji actually went to form the INA, he made her in charge of the party. So she was basically running the Forward Bloc Party when he left and to form the INA in early 1940s. Then we see Malati Chaudhary. She was also a social and civil rights activist as well as a freedom fighter. So in this slide, we'll talk about a few more personalities who helped draft the Indian Constitution. So on the left, we have Purnima Banerjee. So Purnima Banerjee was the secretary of the Indian National Congress for a period of time. She participated in the Dandi March and the Quit India movement and went to prison several times. The next personality we see is Rajkumari Amrit Kaur. So she was an activist and freedom fighter and also the co-founder of All India Women's Conference. And she was in fact the first health minister of independent India. In addition to that, she was also the founder of All India Institute of Medical Sciences, or AIIMS as we all know it. And she was a firm believer in women's education, their participation in sports, as well as their healthcare. She also set up several other institutes like the Tuberculosis Association of India, the Central Leprosy and Research Institute, and was also the vice chair of the Board of Governors of the League of Red Cross Societies and the chair of Executive Committee of St. John's Ambulance Society. So as we can see, she was a multifaceted personality and had a lot of contributions in developing the healthcare system in independent India. And in fact, a very interesting note that I read was that when she died in 1964, the New York Times actually called her a princess in her nation's service. And actually, she was a princess, as you can see from her title, Rajkumari. Then the next personality we're going to talk about is Renuka Roy. So Renuka Roy was also a freedom fighter, social activist, and a politician. She was also the president of the AIWC in 1952, and she served on the Planning Commission and on the governing body of the Shishu Bharati University in Shantiniketan. She served as a Minister of Relief and Rehabilitation in the West Bengal government and was also responsible for for establishing associations like the All Bengal Women's Union and the Women's Coordinating Council. Next, we all know about Sarojini Naidu. So there is not much to add to all that we know about her. So she was freedom fighter, a poet, activist, and also known as the Nightingale of India. And she was in fact the first governor of independent India. Shucheta Kirpalni. So she was a freedom fighter and politician like everybody. And in fact, she was the first chief minister of Uttar Pradesh and in fact, the first women chief minister in independent India. Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, we all know about her. So she was, one of the, I would say, one of the introductions to her is that she was the daughter of Motilal Nehru and sister of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, and was in fact appointed as the first woman and first Asian to be elected as the president of the UN General Assembly. In addition to that, of course, she was a freedom fighter, diplomat, and a politician. And last but not the least is Annie Mascarenhas. She was a freedom fighter and member of the Legislative Assembly from Kerala. So I'll move on to the next slide. So in the next section, what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about some of the significant characteristics of the Indian Constitution. So what really makes the Indian Constitution unique and different from the other constitutions of the world. So we will talk about some of those, and then we'll move on to a little bit of comparison between some of the key features of Indian Constitution with the Constitution of United States, and then later with the form of constitution that exists for United Kingdom. So as we have learned from Rupesh and Sanjay over the last 2 days, is that the Indian Constitution was adopted on 26 November 1949, and it became operational on 26 January 1950. And that's basically when our Republic Day started. Another very unique characteristic of the Indian Constitution is it's actually the longest written constitution in the world, with 445 articles, which are arranged into 22 parts. And so far, in the 70 plus years that the Constitution has been adopted, there has been 103 amendments so far. Indian Constitution has a clearly declarative preamble and is based on collaborative federalism. And then, as a very interesting fact about the Indian Constitution is that the preamble declares India to be sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. And these are the key principles based on which the governing principles of India has been developed. And even today, these are the key things based on which anything that happens in India, any governance that happens in India is based on these principles. States do not have authority to actually make laws, and the Union of States is an indestructible union of destructible states. So by that, what we mean is that the Indian Federation is indestructible. That cannot be destroyed, but it is formed of states that can be destructible. By that, what we mean is that in India, the federal government has the power to create, to merge states, to divide states. And as we all know, in the recent past, there have been quite a few mergers and creation of new states. For example, Chhattisgarh was created. Then the most recent state, Telangana, was created. So I think these are certain unique characteristics that the Indian Constitution gives us provision of, which is unlike the US Constitution. And when we do the comparison, we will talk more about it. India has a parliamentary form of government where president is the executive head who actually runs the government, but with the advice of prime minister and his cabinet ministers. So president in India is actually considered the de jure head, or the figurative head of the state. But the prime minister is called as the de facto head because he is really, he's the one who has a lot of powers. Although any bills that are signed in India are all signed in the name of the president, but in complete consultation and advice of the prime minister and his cabinet ministers. The other very unique characteristic of Indian Constitution is that there is strong separation of powers between legislative and the judicial branches, which thereby creates a provision for necessary checks and balances. And we will talk a little more about that in the next slide. So here we have a comparison between the US Constitution and the Indian Constitution. So US Constitution was actually adopted, as we can see, more than 200 years back on July 17, 1787, whereas Indian Constitution is pretty young. It was only adopted in 1949. In terms of complexity, the US Constitution is actually the shortest constitution among all modern constitutions in the world, with only 7 articles and 27 amendments in 200 years. So it is considered to be a relatively rigid constitution where amendments are not very easy to make. Whereas in Indian Constitution, it was already written as the longest constitution, and in the 70 plus years already there has been 103 amendments. And if we think of it, there are pros and cons to both, but with the evolving world, with the changing needs of the nation, sometimes it is important to keep up with these amendments to be able to govern in a more effective manner. And I think that has been a huge plus point of the form or the system of Indian governance and constitution. In US, there is a federal structure with states having their own constitution. So, and this is also very interesting. So any person who is a citizen of US, they're not only citizens of United States as a country or as a federation, but they are also citizens of the state where they live in. So there are 2 constitutions that exist side by side, the constitution of the state and the constitution of the country. Whereas in India, it's collaborative federalism, where there is some division of power between central and state authorities, but the federation or the central power, they make all of the laws, and the constitution, it's a federal constitution. As far as Union of States goes, in the US, it's indestructible union of indestructible states. So both the federation and the state, both of them are in an indestructible structure, whereas where none of these boundaries can be amended. Whereas in India, it's indestructible union of destructible states. So although the federation or the country remains the same, the border remains the same, but within the country, there can be merger of states or division of states, depending on the need. The US government is a presidential form of government where the president is actually elected by the people and he forms the government. Whereas in India, it's a parliamentary form of government where we have the lower house and the upper house. Lower house is the Lok Sabha, upper house is the Rajya Sabha. And the leader of the Lok Sabha is actually the elected representative of the country, which is the prime minister. And the head of the upper house of the Rajya Sabha is actually the vice president of India. And that's actually a common theme between India and US, because in US also the head or the leader of the upper house or the Senate is actually the vice president. In terms of nature of federalism, there is symmetric federalism with equal representation of each state in the Senate in US. So irrespective of the size of the state or the population of the state, there are equal number of representatives in the Senate. So whereas the state of California with the highest population has 2 representatives in the Senate, similarly, a state like Montana or Idaho would also have 2 representatives in the Senate. Whereas in India, it's asymmetric federalism with, with representation depending on the population, size of the population. In terms of presidential power, this is an interesting point. So president in the US is directly elected by people and is not accountable to the House of Congress. Whereas in India, president is elected, by the legislature and has a strong, does not have a strong veto power. However, in India, the way it works is that president has something called a pocket veto power, which is pretty interesting because, well, in this case, what happens is that if a bill is sent to the president and president is really not willing to sign the bill and doesn't want to take any action on it, he or she can delay the bill forever. And it is something where they indirectly consider, always put the statement as, yes, the bill is under consideration, but they really take no action and the bill sits over there. The prime minister or the cabinet doesn't have any power to persuade the president to move forward or take any action. But in the alternative, what happens is if the president actually sends the bill back for consideration and it is again sent to the president, then he or she has to sign it. So in some cases, especially I remember an instance where Jail Singh was the president and the prime minister was Rajiv Gandhi. He actually used the pocket veto power quite a bit. In terms of judiciary, the judges are elected by the Senate in the US. So we would see a lot of influence of the political system in determining the judicial authorities in the US. Whereas in India, it is the selection of judges is done by a collegium, and the collegium which actually comprises of noted judges or noted people in law and noted members of the judicial system, who then actually send a proposal for nomination to the legislature and the president for their consideration. So it keeps, in terms of the Indian system, it is able to keep a separation between the political system and the judicial system, whereas in the US, the two are extremely integrated. So next, we are going to see, just like the way we looked at the Indian we looked at the comparison between the US Constitution and the Indian Constitution. Here, we're going to do a comparison between the British Constitution and Indian Constitution. In terms of complexity, so what is very interesting to note is that Britain, along with 2 other countries, New Zealand and Israel, are the three countries who do not have a written constitution that they follow. So the British Constitution is largely an unwritten document. There are some sets of rules or laws that have been passed, which they call as statutes, and sometimes they usually refer them for referring to some of the historical, I would say, guidelines, but there is really no written document. Whereas we have already learned that Indian Constitution is the longest constitution in the world. In terms of nature of the government, the British Constitution, it follows a unitary system with powers of government vested in the British Parliament. So executive organ of the states are subordinate to the Parliament. There is only one legislature, and and then England, Scotland, Wales, etc. are administrative units and not politically autonomous units. So unlike the United States and India, where we have central as well as state authorities, in the United Kingdom, it is just a unitary system with the federal system working across the country. So there is no separate legislature for the states. similar to the Indian constitution, in Britain also, it's a parliamentary form of government with constitutional monarchy, whereas in India, it's a parliamentary form of government with the president sitting as the figurative head. And as we discussed, the nature of federalism, it's a unitary system in Britain, whereas in India, it's asymmetrical federalism, with population-based representation. Head of the state, so for Britain follows the parliamentary system with prime minister being the central authority with council of ministers. And Indian system is also very similar to the British system with president being the figurative head of the state. And then for all practical purposes, it is prime minister and his cabinet, ministry of cabinets, who actually for all practical purposes have a lot of power. Judiciary, so for Britain, they have independent judiciary, and similarly, India also has independent judiciary with selection of judges is done by the collegium. Okay, so now that we have gone through, some of the very, I would say, salient features of Indian Constitution, and we have done some comparison of Indian Constitution with two other major, constitutions of the world, we will now talk a little bit about how has the performance of the Indian Republic been so far? I mean, we know it's a young country. India got its independence only over 70 years ago. And from the time of the formation of the independent nation, how has India really performed in terms of various parameters? I think this will be very interesting to talk about. So as we can see, the areas on the left, here are the areas where India has done really very well in terms of the Indian Republic has done extremely well. Whereas areas on the right are some of the areas where there is opportunity for us to do a lot better. And we will discuss about some of these. So going to the first point, deepening democratic form of governance. So if we remember, at the time of India's independence, India had a large population that was illiterate. And given this, what had happened is our critics were very skeptic, and they thought, how would a democracy work in such a framework with a lot of illiterate people? However, all credits to our forefathers who had the vision. India has actually conducted 17 elections, all in a strictly democratic manner, and has kept military out of the democratic process for so long. And if we think of it, in 1952, when the first general election happened, there were 54 political parties. And the general election that happened in 2014 and also in 2019, they had 464 political parties, but the election was all conducted in a very democratic manner. So this shows how deep-rooted democracy has become in the Republic of India. The other huge credit that we have to give to our administrators and to big pat in the back for India as a nation is the economic development and growth that the nation has seen. In fact, today, India stands to be the world's 5th largest economy by nominal GDP and the 3rd largest by purchasing power parity. So that itself speaks volumes about itself, given the fact that India only got independence about 70 years back. Green revolution and self-reliance. So there was a time in India, say between the 1960s and the 70s, where we remember there was a lot of famine, and India was in deep trouble and had to constantly rely on different other countries for importing food in India. But Green Revolution really helped all of this and completely changed the scenario. So with Green Revolution in India, India could achieve self-sufficiency in agriculture sector. And not only did they become self-reliant, but were also able to export many produce to different countries. In addition to that, what has happened is there has been introduction of modern machinery, hybrid seeds, etc., which has also contributed to huge progress in this sector. Another huge achievement that India has seen has been in terms of its military strength. So essentially, the war with China in 1962 was actually a complete game changer. So after that war, India gradually transformed its image from being a peace-loving country to being a country with peace with power. So defense budgets were increased significantly, and then military might also increased along with advanced trainings that kept happening. Um, and today, India has the world's third largest military force. And strategic impact of this was that India started putting its opinions at World Forum much more firmly because of the power and the strength they have in terms of the huge military. We all know about the huge technology development that has happened in India. So all-round development in telecom, including communications, information technology, space technology, this has been achieved over the last 70 years. In fact, most noteworthy among these is that the Indian space programs today are considered to be one of the most efficient in the world, both in terms of budget as well as success rate. Coming to communal and social strength. So, the foundation of the Indian Constitution, the preamble itself states that India was a sovereign, secular, democratic republic. So, keeping that in mind, I think there has been, in spite of the fact that India is an extremely multicultural community with multiple people following multiple religions, speaking multiple languages, having different ways of living, still the country has been able to the people of the country have been able to coexist in peace side by side with each other, and there has been immense development in all four fronts. Agreed, there are also some differences, and in fact there are quite a few issues that the government is facing, but overall, if we look at it, I think it has been a good success. Similarly, in terms of India has developed nuclear power, and it is using nuclear energy in terms of development in all sectors, and that has also contributed to the strength of the nation. So moving on to some of the areas where India has not done so well and requires a lot of attention even after so many years of independence. So one of the first things that comes up is Human Development Index parameters. And this actually comprises of statistics which includes different parameters of living standard, health development index, education, and other parameters. India has sadly ranked at 131 among 188 countries in terms of the latest rankings that has been received. So this is, I think, one area where a lot of development still has to happen, although infant mortality rate and all of that has improved significantly from where it was. But overall, healthcare needs a lot of improvement, and only if we look at a comparison in the last 2 decades, it has only moved marginally. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done in that sector. Internal security and internal security concerns is a big thing. And in spite of the fact that there are people of so many religions, so many cultures living together side by side, broadly in a peaceful manner, but there are significant internal security concerns happening because of some groups having differences or having different ideas, and that's been a challenge. And I'm sure the administration and the government and the country is trying to improve in that sector. Corruption, as we all know, bribery exists in all levels of the administration in India. So definitely this is an area that needs to be looked at. Lack of uniform civil code still persists even after 70 years of independence. Same civil offense is treated differently based on community, ethnicity, religion, etc. So this is an area that definitely needs a lot of work. And we all know about the Kashmir issue. Kashmir has been a challenge. The seeds of this was sown during the British rule and still continues to be a strategic challenge in India. In the next section, we will do two things. We will go through the first Republic Day celebrations that happened in India. How did that happen? And we'll do a quick comparison, just through pictures, a comparison of how simple it was and today how the Republic Day celebrations happen. And then after that, Sanjay is going to take us through some video clips of the latest Republic Day celebrations. So in these three pictures, the first picture, we can see that on way to the Irvine Stadium, Delhi, President Rajendra Prasad is greeting the citizens of India. And in the second picture, we can see that there was a 31-gun salute happening in the stadium when India was declared as a republic, and Dr. Rajendra Prasad was sworn in as the first president of India at 10:30 immediately after this. And here we can see Dr. Rajendra Prasad, after becoming president, taking a salute. In the next page, what we are seeing is that for the first Republic Day celebrations of India, the chief guest was actually the Indonesian president, Dr. Sukarno, and his wife. So he is being greeted over here, as we can see in this picture. And then on the picture, top picture to the right, we can see the first Republic Day parade at the amphitheater. And in this picture, we can see the walls of the Purana Killa. And below, we can see as the parade is marching from the amphitheater to the Red Fort, people are actually watching. I mean, throngs of people, they are watching to get a glimpse of the parade. Okay, so here in this slide, I have captured, some interesting facts about the first celebration that happened on the first Republic Day, and then some, I would say, some events that have kind of become conventions for Republic Day. So Dr. Rajendra Prasad actually took oath as India's first president. So that is an event that happened on that day. And then the venue for the Republic Day was Irvine Stadium, which we have already seen in the pictures. There was a grand parade by the armed forces. And then the chief guest for the first Republic Day was Indonesian President Dr. Sukarno that we saw in the picture before. So some of these have actually become conventions for Republic Day in every celebration that has happened after that. So the President of India addresses the nation on the eve of the Republic Day, and then the national flag is hoisted by him prior to Republic Day parade and is greeted by a 21-gun salute. The Republic Day celebrations last for about 3 whole days from January 26th through January 29th. The celebrations commence with President's arrival for the flag hoisting and parade at Rajpath and end with beating the retreat at Vijayachak. And I think Sanjay is going to talk a little bit about that. Then the other interesting fact is that Republic Day, along with Independence Day and Gandhi Jayanti, are 3 national holidays that are observed in India for all these years. So here, in the previous slides, we saw the celebrations that happened on the first Republic Day. But how does it look like today? So these are some of the pictures and glimpses that we have captured for the 71st Republic Day celebrations. So as we can see over here, this is kind of like a pyramid structure created by the all-round defense team. And then on the top, we can see some aircraft, some fighter jet displays, and we will see more in the video glimpses that Sanjay is going to share with us. Then below, we can see, part of the parade is actually showcasing some of the might of our army and of the different battalions. So here we can see all the 3 pictures at the bottom are actually capturing those. Here we can see passing through the India Gate, a part of the parade. And then on the right top, we can see an exhibit from the Indian Navy. And then we can see, you know, some exhibits from our artillery team and overall a picture of how it looks like with, you know, flower arrangements of the Indian national flag. So Sanjay, over to you.
All right. Thank you, Swati. And in interest of time, I'll probably show a fewer clippings than I originally intended to. So let me just share my screen and I will get started. So I hope you guys can see this video right now. And I'm going to start it. And I will jump to different sections of this video so that you can get some glimpses of the ceremony. So here is the Prime Minister laying a wreath at Amar Jawan Memorial.
Our sixth chief guest, His Excellency Lee Hsien Loong, Prime Minister of the Republic of Singapore, being greeted by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. India-Singapore ties have strategic, political, economic, and cultural dimensions.
So this is the beginning of the parade.
दिल्ली क्षेत्र के जनरल ऑफिसर कमांडिंग लेफ्टिनेंट जनरल असित मिस्त्री, अति विशिष्ट सेवा मेडल, सेना मेडल, विशिष्ट सेवा मेडल, परेड कमांडर लेफ्टिनेंट जनरल असित.
So here you can see some of the tabloids.
अगली झांकी पूर्व सैनिकों की है. भारतीय वायुसेना की ओर से पेश झांकी की थीम है पूर्व सैनिक एंड एसेट टू द नेशन. सलामी मंच के सामने
This is the Indian Navy.
भारतीय सुरक्षा के लिए सामरिक रूप से तैयार सेना. भारतीय नौसेना राष्ट्रीय सुरक्षा समृद्धि को सुनिश्चित करने के लिए पूरी तरीके से प्रतिबद्ध है. ये
Enthralled spectators on both sides. And this is the Air Force tableau. Indian Air Force encouraging indigenization. 3 women officers, Flight Lieutenant Chanda, Flight Lieutenant Aditi Bali, and Flight Lieutenant Amardeep Kaur are part of the Air Force tableau.
There are bands that represent various armed forces. So this is the border security force, which has the Camel Battalion. This is another band. And these are some of the tabloids. This is the All India Radio tabloid.
आज है शक संवत 1939 के माघ मास की छठी तिथि. तदनुसार शुक्रवार 26 जनवरी 2018.
Back in the day, people used to sit around the radio and listen to it.
And now approaching the saluting base.
And then many of the states have their own tabloids. As you can see, this is Karnataka.
With 1/5 of its land mass covered by forests, Karnataka is truly endowed with nature's bounty.
Maharashtra. This is from Gujarat.
गांधी जी ने इसकी स्थापना की और यहाँ वर्षों तक रही. यहीं से सन 1930 में उन्होंने गांधी यात्रा की शुरुआत की.
And this is some of the motorcycle displays.
motorcycle riders on a single motorcycle, led by Lady Constable Rajendra Prasad.
एक मोटरसाइकिल पर 8 वीरांगनाएं अत्याधुनिक हथियारों से लैस 4 मुस्तैद प्रहरी देश की हिफाजत करने के लिए अपना सर्वस्व न्यौछावर करने का प्रदर्शन करें।
By the border personnel at the borders, the formation led by Lady Constable Anita Raman.
और अब 7 मोटरसाइकिल
And this is the flyby that Swati mentioned during her part of the presentation. So usually the Republic Day ends with
Commander Abhishek Shukla commanding 116 helicopter unit.
with a flyby of different battalions from the Air Force.
The captains of the other 2 helicopters, Wing Commander April Fermi and Wing Commander Neeraj. And there we can see the pale blue of the sky welcoming into its embrace hundreds of balloons in the colors of our national flag. And as the shades of freedom take wings, they carry with them the aspirations of over 1.2 billion Indians for a better world, a beautiful renewal, and a brighter future for all. And what a display it's been here today. Visual delight, spirit.
All right. So I think I'll stop sharing for now. So I hope you enjoyed those glimpses of the parade. I mean, the parade is usually a tableau of colors, representation of various states, different bands, different army regiments. They display all of their, I mean, India displays all of its grandeur during this parade. So it is a fun thing to watch. And Swati has posted links from last year's parade, which is available on YouTube. So get your kids together, sit and watch it. I mean, it's a great time. We used to enjoy it as kids and used to, look forward to the parade like we do here for Thanksgiving parade for the Macy's parade. Likewise in India, the Republic Day parade was a huge deal. As a family, we used to get together and watch it. So I think we are done as far as the presentation is concerned today. I hope you guys enjoyed watching it, learned a lot as we did, as we researched all of this for this learning sessions. And if there are any questions, I think we can take them, although we might be a little short on time.
Questions are always welcome, though. That means people are actually wanting to learn more. I mean, you have provided a lot of information, but it's always good to see if there's some more.
In any case, I mean, if questions come through different channels, if we are not able to address them today, Lataji, you know us, and you can always
Absolutely.
ask us.
They can always post it on our IAGB Facebook page on this very post, and we can then address them as and when they come in. Okay. So I think we can declare this learning session, this 2-part learning session to an end, bring it to an end. And it has been fantastic. I don't know about the rest of you, but I know there's so much information I have received and learned. And particularly this last, we learned about the US Constitution as well, a lot of things that we weren't aware of, the UK Constitution too, and all these wonderful players in the making of this Constitution and the women that were involved. And I'm very proud to know that even today, as you looked at the march past and the parade, you see so many women represented in all the various Army, Navy, and Air Force. They are bringing women out into the forefront. So India has progressed tremendously in this area compared to most of the developed nations in the world. I think we are making rapid progress in women's participation in all the areas. So I'm very, very happy, and I know the people who are viewing this, I'm sure they're all just as educated, and thank you deeply from the bottom of my heart, Sanjay Rao, Swati, and Rupesh, for tag teaming this entire series and making this information available to all of us. This will be available on YouTube and on Facebook. That can be viewed on our IAGB Facebook page, and it can be viewed on YouTube if you subscribe to the IAGB YouTube page as well. So it's available for viewing, and you can possibly write some information from the slides that talk to your children about it. So I think it's been great. So I want to end this. I know we've run a little bit late, but I'm sure no one was looking at the time right now because it was so interesting. And so I'm going to end this evening, this 2-part session. Thank you very much again, and good night.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.